Hey, people, it's my turn to do the morning Mount Gilead devotion. I don't do that very often.
Mm, it doesn't. It's not up yet. Sorry. Okay, now you're live.
Hey, people, it's my turn to do the morning devotion. I don't do that very often because I know you have to listen to me almost every week anyway, but it's my turn, and I happen to be in Mansfield, Massachusetts with one of the people I love most in this world, my son Trey. We're just outside of Boston. And we were talking about this coming Sunday. And this coming Lord's Day, there will be people here in this very building in Massachusetts that I'm in right now that'll be gathered around the Lord's table. Trey will actually be preaching in New Hampshire this Sunday. Not far down the road from here, about 45 minutes away in Waltham, Massachusetts, uh, Drew Thurman will be gathering with other believers. And then, Lord willing, I'll be back home with you in Mooresville. And one thing we'll all have in common is we'll be meeting around the Lord's table. So, this morning for our devotion, as we look forward to this Lord's Day weekend, Trey's going to share a little bit with us about what we often call the Last Supper. Maybe we should call it the First Supper. But listen to what Trey has to say about this morning.
Isn't it just like my dad? He's got a little work to do and he pawns it off on somebody else. It's just like a preacher who only works 30 minutes a week, anyways, to pawn it off on somebody else. It's great to be here with you this morning, all the way from Boston, Massachusetts. And like Dad said, we're going to talk a little bit about the Lord's Supper. I'm actually preaching in New Hampshire this week on Sunday, and we're going to talk about the Lord's Supper at that location as well in New Hampshire. If you know me at all, if we've spent any time together, you know that I love food. Like, food and eating is one of my most favorite things to do. And what I've realized as I was preparing for this message this week, that I realized that meals are often attached to memories. Some of my fondest memories are around a table or centered around a meal. For example, when I was in high school, every Tuesday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, Dad and I would get up and we would go to Bob Evans for some biscuits and gravy and some hot black coffee. And man, Bob Evans biscuits and gravy is, there's nothing like it. And I remember the conversations and spending time with my dad early on Tuesday mornings around the breakfast table. I remember the first date I took my wife on. We went to Buffalo Wild Wings in Plainfield, and probably had 15 traditional medium sauce wings, and it would go on to lead to one of the best relationships of my life. Right before Bailey and I got engaged, I took her out for Italian food in Newport, Kentucky. After we got married, at our reception, we had fried chicken. And then when we left the reception, the very first meal we shared together as a married couple was Taco Bell. I'm fancy, I'm romantic, I know. Look, some of my best memories are attached with meals. Some of my fondest, most precious memories in life center around food, and they center around the table. And in the Last Supper, or the First Supper, as Dad said in Luke chapter 22, Jesus is going to give us some new things to remember around a meal. I think he knew what he was doing when he set up one of the most important times of our week, one of the most important memorials around a meal, because we so often associate memories with meals. And what he's going to do in this meal in Luke chapter 22 is he's going to redefine everything. In fact, if I could just give you three little words to remember to kind of think through this week, it's that the divine redefines. The divine Jesus redefines everything. So let's start in Luke chapter 22, verse 7, and we'll see how Jesus goes through this meal and how he redefines everything. It says, "Now the festival of unleavened bread arrived when the Passover lamb is sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John ahead and said, 'Go and prepare the Passover meal so we can eat it together.' 'Where do you want us to prepare it?' they asked him. And he replied, 'As soon as you enter Jerusalem, a man carrying a pitcher of water will meet you. Follow him. At the house he enters, say to the owner, the teacher asks, "Where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?" He will take you upstairs to a larger room that is already set up. That is where you should prepare our meal.' They went off to the city, and they found everything just as Jesus had said, and they prepared the Passover meal there." So what do we notice from those first couple verses? Well, first of all, we notice that Jesus is in charge, right? Jesus is sending Peter and John to prepare the meal, but Jesus had already prepared everything for them ahead of time. He prepped the preppers, so to speak. He was prepared before they went in. He's orchestrating every single detail. When you would celebrate the Passover as a Jewish family, you would do that with your immediate family. But the Old Testament tells us that if your family wasn't large enough or you were alone, that you could join other families as well. None of these 12 disciples were with their family. They made kind of a makeshift family of their own, and Jesus had established himself as the leader. He's the one they would call teacher. He's the one who sends them to say to the owner of the house, the teacher, the rabbi, needs a place to celebrate this meal. So from the very beginning of this meal, before it even starts, we see Jesus establishing himself as the leader of this new family. He's the divine. He's the one who sees into the future and says, this is what is awaiting you as you go to prepare this meal. Jesus is the divine leader of this group. And then the meal actually starts. Luke chapter 22, verse 14. When the time came, Jesus and the apostles sat down together at the table. And Jesus said, I have been very eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. What do we notice there? We notice two really important things. First, he's eager to eat this meal with his disciples. And who isn't eager to eat a meal? I always look forward to mealtime. Number two, we notice that Jesus is going to suffer. And he's not talking about like indigestion or gas. I mean, this is nothing that Tums can fix. He's going to suffer the cross. And we know after this meal, he's going to go to the cross and he is going to suffer for all mankind. But what's interesting about this is that while he knows he's going to suffer, think about who's sitting at the table with him. Judas Iscariot, the one who would betray him so that Jesus had to suffer, is sitting there at the table. The one who knows he will suffer is invited and welcomed the one who causes the suffering around his table. See, the divine redefines everything, and Jesus redefines our relationships with others. Jesus invited his enemy, the one who would betray him, to his table. And just a little practical application, our country and our world is so divided right now. We demonize everybody on social media. We've always got a quick, snarky comeback to make somebody else look dumb. What would happen if before you disagreed with your enemy on social media, you invited them to lunch and said, come to my table. I want to talk to you. We may disagree, but let's talk about this as friends before I demonize you as an enemy. See, that's what Jesus does at this table. He redefines our relationship with others. But he's not finished. Verse 16. He says, for I tell you now that I won't eat this meal again until its meaning is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Verse 17, then he took a cup of wine and he gave thanks to God for it. And then he said, take this and share it among yourselves. For I will not drink wine again until the kingdom of God has come. Notice in those couple verses, he makes two allusions to the kingdom of God. And he says, I won't partake of this meal again until the kingdom of God comes. Where's Jesus' mind? He's thinking of the afterlife. He's thinking of eternity. He's saying that death does not have the final word. See, he redefines our attitude towards others and our relationship with others, but he also redefines our outlook on the future. He's letting us know we will take this meal together again, but it won't be until after death. It won't be until the kingdom of God is fully realized. In other words, friends, as we sit at this table and this is our last meal together, this isn't our last meal together because in the future, in the kingdom of God, in eternity, there is more to follow. So if you're down in the dumps and you're discouraged as you look around and you see everything that's going on and you see the death and the destruction that plagues our world, just know that death does not have the final word because Jesus redefines our outlook on the future and he gives us something to look forward to, a feast, like they talk about in Revelation 19 verse 9, a feast to look forward to in eternity in the kingdom of God. There's one last thing he redefines. Luke chapter 22 verse 19. He took some bread and he gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it into pieces and he gave it to the disciples saying, this is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. After supper, he took another cup of wine and he said, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you. If you've spent any time in church, you know that those are familiar words. We probably say them almost every week all over the world. Do this in remembrance of me. The the bread represents his body broken and his blood spilled, which is the cup of juice. But notice that Jesus invokes this idea of new covenant language. He said, "This is the new covenant confirmed with my blood." A covenant was an agreement between two parties. Usually you had a powerful party and a lesser or weaker party. And that's what we see in the old covenant with God and Israel. God said, "You follow me, I'll take care of you. You obey my commands, I'll take care of you." But what happened? Time and time again, Israel failed to follow God. They failed to keep up their end of the covenant. And so God had to punish them, and he had to do all these different things to correct them back to the covenant. And finally, God said, "We're not doing this anymore." He said, "I'm going to set up a new covenant to where the only thing you have to do is believe and be baptized and follow me, and I will give you eternity. I will make a relationship with me possible through this new covenant confirmed by this new Passover lamb, Jesus. He will take away the sins of the world. He will take on all the sins so that we may live." That's the new covenant that we get. See, Jesus not only redefines our relationship with others and our relationship and the way we think about the future, Jesus redefines our relationship with God. He makes this new covenant so that it's possible for us to exist and experience relationship with God, because as we saw with Israel, we would never be able to hold up our end of the agreement. We would never be able to get our way back into relationship with God. And so that's what he says. If you just simply believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that he died for you, you can have relationship with him. Let me say it again. The divine redefines. And if he can redefine age-old traditions, and he can redefine how we treat our enemies and who we welcome to our table, and he can even redefine our outlook on death and give us hope for the future, then I know that he can redefine and redeem your life as well. It's great to see you all, and I hope you have a fantastic week.